When was the last time you saw a woman beaten by her husband? A dead child? A person mutilated beyond recognition? If you were a law enforcement officer, you might see these things every day. If you were a civilian, you might see these things once in your lifetime. Police officers endure trials that no person will ever endure. Yet, they continue to leave their homes and say goodbye to their wives and children, not knowing whether they'll come back home alive or even come back home the same person they were when they left their wives and their children that they once knew. Tyrese Nichols' death was a tragedy, make no mistake about that. I have absolutely no remorse for the sick, disgusting actions of these Memphis police officers who brutally murdered him in cold blood. But this tragedy must be a lesson, not a reckoning. This is our opportunity to look deeper into why police violence happens and how it can be deterred, not through punishing and humiliating and disrespecting good law enforcement officers, but through making sure that no officer becomes mentally unfit to serve their communities. Welcome to this national edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Leonard Sipes is a crime statistic expert, and he joins us to talk about, we talk about the mental health of the larger society, Leonard, but we don't talk about the mental health of law enforcement and what the defund the police, the disrespect, the fact that criminals, whether it's petty theft, whether it's misdemeanor crimes, are put back on the street after these law enforcement officers work so hard to arrest them, and how these criminals escalate their crimes, and the weight that it weighs on law enforcement officers, not excusing the small number that are represented in what we saw in Memphis, but what about the conditioning and the fact that law enforcement face situations that none of us will ever face in our lifetime?
Well, Armstrong, you have to take a look at what's happening throughout the United States in terms of the fact that there are hundreds of police officers leaving cities throughout the United States. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, tens of thousands of police officers have left. And from what I understand from talking to law enforcement people throughout the country, thousands more are in the process of leaving. So a law enforcement officer, you can't experience what a law enforcement officer does and without it being affected, without it affecting him or her. I mean, it takes a huge psychological toll to go in, as I have, in terms of an automobile accident where, you have the entire family where limbs are hanging off, blood is squirting all over the place. It is just a horrific scene, and you're the only person there at the moment until that ambulance or backup arrives. So you're basically operating in a war zone. That happens night after night, day after day regarding police officers. The first time you go into a situation where there's a dead child, as I did one time when a mother inadvertently rolled over into her child, you've got to pick up that baby. You've got to try to resuscitate that baby. You've got to try to deal with a frantic mother. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in terms of what law enforcement officers experience throughout the country. And with the lack of support that we are currently giving law enforcement officers is one of the reasons why they're leaving in droves. As long as we have police departments that cannot fill their ranks, and I'm talking about not 20 down or 30 down, I'm talking about 500 down, 600 down, 700 down. As long as we have this sort of a situation where police officers not only experience all of this, I mean, there's over 60,000 assaults on police officers on a yearly basis, well over 300 deaths on the part of police officers throughout the country. Families are literally telling their police officer loved ones to get out of law enforcement and get out now. So we have a real problem, and we're never, never, never going to be able to control the crime situation as long as we don't have enough police officers to respond to calls for service from citizens.
You are an expert on the statistics. You're a crime media relations expert, an author. What about this perception that only black people and minorities meet violent deaths, are attacked, and brutalized by law enforcement?
Okay, well, first of all, we go through the same scenario we've gone through in the past. So the vast majority of people were arrested are not African American. The vast majority of people tried are not African American. The vast majority of people in prison, in jail, and parole and probation are not African American. So what I say today and what I say always is that this applies across the board. It doesn't matter to me whether it's a small town in Nebraska or whether we're talking about Baltimore or Washington, D.C. The other side of the statistics is that, the Department of Justice polls citizens every 2 or 3 years in terms of their perceptions of law enforcement. And they always ask how many times was force used, or the use of force, or the threat of force, how many times was it used? It's 2% in terms of 54 million contacts, and it's 3% in terms of police-initiated stops. So this stereotype that we have of a overly brutal police agencies throughout the country is a sheer myth based upon the data, based upon what citizens had to say. And this has now been replicated 3 times. If you take a look at Gallup, if you take a look at lots of other polls, you find an overwhelming amount of support from law enforcement. You find an overwhelming amount of support from law enforcement from the African American community. Now, what the problem is with the African American community, they will say, yes, we support law enforcement, but we don't believe that we're respected. So we within the law enforcement community need to do a much better job in terms of reaching out to the African American community or any community to be sure that every citizen is treated with respect. And you take a look at one more statistic.
Hold that point before we look at another statistic, because when we return, Leonard, Dominick Izzo, a 16-year police veteran, will be joining the conversation. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. Dominick, thank you so much for joining us. We have such fragile communities throughout this country. Fragile communities are begging for more cops. Fragile communities, 87% of them, if you look at statistics overall, say they respect law enforcement. What is causing just the tearing apart of these communities where it's just overwhelming law enforcement officers in today's America?
Public perception, social media, emotions, all that. I was listening during the break, and I was listening to the statistics, right? I follow these statistics all the time where you get 52% of all the violent crimes are committed by within 13% of the population, and there's a disproportionate number of law enforcement interactions that are done, by whites and blacks, and none of that matters when it comes down to the perception and the reality of those who are at the receiving end of what's going on a daily basis. If you really want to look at the human aspect of all this, you look at social media. One of the biggest things and problems we have with social media, law enforcement, is there's no steam for the pressure cooker to alleviate. Law enforcement, cops specifically, they're not allowed to say anything. You cannot vent yourself for anything on social media with your friends and family. You'll be immediately condemned. You have your district or state's attorneys who have the final say, your command staff who doesn't have your back, and then the public. So number one, cops are living in a pressure cooker. Number two, you look at social media, and it blows me away. Every single incident I ever see, including this last one in Memphis, Tennessee, where you will get people who go online and they'll support the police. Well, he shouldn't have resisted. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Stop resisting. These people, X, Y, and Z. We have to look at the fact that right now what's going on with the law enforcement community, the black community, is there's only one truth that's ever being told, and that's the side of the black community. You always hear about their struggle, what's going on with them, what's going on with law enforcement. You never hear what's going on with the law enforcement's personal human side of struggle. And that's where it all starts. And then you wind up getting contempt, horrible behavior from cops, and there's just no emotional outlet for them. So statistics, they're going to always tell the truth, but you're never going to get the honesty or the reality or the truth of the officers online. That's a big problem we need to start addressing.
As a law enforcement officer and a veteran for 16 years, is there any possible way to prevent what happened in Memphis and other places that happen around the country? Is this just something we have to embrace ourselves for?
No, you need to start going after command staff, because I'm going to tell you, number one, they know exactly what their problems are in with their departments. All problems stem from command staff. End of story. What also blows me away is this is 2023. 2023. Every human being seems to have a cell phone. How is it that we still have police officers today who are stupid enough to sit there and say, hey, you know, I know I'm probably going to be caught on camera today. Let me not control my emotions. And I'm on the side of the American police officer because I did the job, and I understand how when you deal with John Q. public, you're with a very dynamic personality that's be very difficult to deal with. How do we not have women still controlling their emotions and their behavior on the street today? That's an in-house problem. That's a hiring problem. That's a command problem. So we need to start.
Leonard, what are the statistics telling us about this rise in crime and homicide and petty theft?
Well, right now, what we have is a slew of data talking about urban crime, not necessarily suburban crime, not necessarily rural crime, but urban crime. And so, you know, since 2019, from the major chief chief of police association, in about 76 cities, you know, you're talking about a huge increase in homicides. You're talking about a huge increase since 2019 in terms of aggravated assaults. So we have a real crime problem in our urban areas, and it's a problem. Now, what we see for 2022 is that it seems to be lessening in terms of the homicides and shootings, but aggravated assaults are up, robberies are up, car thefts are up. So the crime problem, particularly in the urban areas, continues to be a real challenge and can only be solved through citizens and law enforcement cooperating with each other.
You know, this is an irrefutable fact, Dominique. The public needs law enforcement just as well as law enforcement needs the public in order to reduce the crime and make people feel safe in their homes and their communities. And this perception that there's this divide between the community and the police. When you put more cops out on the street, it brings about more of the situations you saw in Memphis is more of the exception, not the rule. But you need that cooperation in order to do your job.
You do.
It's impossible.
I ran for.
Go ahead,
who's this?
Dominique.
When I ran for county sheriff in 2018, I specifically wanted to avoid the black neighborhoods first because I didn't want to come across as pandering community. But when I went down there, one of the first things I noticed was it was age different. The younger urban male and female black wanted nothing to do. But when it was over 15, was what do we need to do? What are you going to do to help our communities? There was a massive involvement. So one of the biggest issues is going to be age that we all have to look at. So many factors. When statistics come out that we just want to glance over and we immediately go to, oh, it's a black and white issue. But the number one thing I noticed when it came down and interacting with the black community was the families. It was 30 and over. They were massively looking for community aspects. Law enforcement, help us out. What is the police can do for us? How can we involve? It was the age thing that I noticed off the bat that was a real big issue between the division.
I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. Leonard, where in America where we see a mass reduction of crime and petty thefts, and does that exist because of law enforcement, because of demographics, because of elected officials? Is there a model place in America that we can look to?
Well, first of all, it depends upon who's doing proactive policing. There's one piece of research from the U.S. Department of Justice, one piece of research that basically says it lowers crime, and that's proactive policing. And proactive policing, especially when you're joined by the larger community. Cops have got to get out of their cars, and they've got to confront what they consider to be, when they have probable cause, when they have reasonable suspicion, they get out of their car and confront somebody that they believe is doing something wrong. That's proactive policing. Every community in the United States is going to have to decide for itself what level of proactive policing it wants. But at the moment, you can take whatever strategy you want, whether it's ex-offenders being violence interrupters. It doesn't matter. The only thing that has a research base behind it is proactive policing. Now, that's supposedly what's getting law enforcement agencies in trouble throughout the country, because when you do proactive policing, when you get out of the police car, when you confront people that you think are doing something illegal, that has tremendous risks to it. It puts the officer in jeopardy. It puts the suspects in jeopardy. Out of 54 million contacts in the United States, 54 million, only 1% of the population said that they were disrespected in the process, which is an unbelievable figure. But unless you're willing to do proactive policing, at the moment, that's the only modality that we have per the U.S. Department of Justice that is actually effective. The problem is what our citizens are willing to accept, what are communities willing to accept in terms of the level of proactive policing. That becomes the million-dollar figure. So if you want cops to stay in their cars and not get out and confront people, if you want cops not to get out of their cars, just ride through the community, respond to calls, they can do that, but it's not going to impact crime. If you want to live in safer communities, you've got to have a certain level of proactivity, and that proactivity needs to be supported by the community that the police are operating in.
You know, Dominick, this is not a politically correct question I'm going to ask you, but I've got to ask it. Why are young Americans who happen to be black disproportionately commit the majority of the crimes? It's not because of their race. Is it their value system? Is it their lack of fathers? Is it because there is no accountability or responsibility? We make excuses, but we have to address that issue. In this country, where there's a high concentration of young men in these cities that happen to be black, it's a fact. Crime is out of control. Why?
Because they know they can get away with it. They know 100%.
Pretty much.
They get arrested. You're going to wind up going to jail. The state's attorney, district attorney is going to drop charges. Why would you not get away with crime? You have value system. I'm not going to speak to that. I'm not in the black family. I say all the time that the Italian household and the black household are very much similarly raised. When you look at teachers can't do their jobs in school. I mean, out here in the Chicago public school system, these teachers can't do anything to educate these kids. Cops, we know how that goes. Authority is gone. I mean, you break the breakdown of the black family. We've talked about that for God knows how many years. So ultimately speaking, if you're a young urban black, and most of the part of the problems are males. If you look at the statistics, you're going to see an overwhelming amount of males who are committing crimes. Why? When you got these young men out there who are their testosterone, serotonin level, God only knows what else is going on in their head, is still forming, and they're not mature, so they make bad decisions. Why would they not make these bad decisions? There's no accountability for them. So that's our lawmakers. That's our politicians. That's our police command who is, well, you know, I got a boss and my boss works over at Village Hall. 100%. If you can get away with it, why would you not? So that's where you really got to start to look at it.
And we'll be back. Don't go away. Leonard, let me continue my political incorrectness. Break down the statistics according to race on who commits the crimes.
Well, again, what I said at the very beginning of the show, that the overwhelming majority of people arrested in jail, in prison, on parole and probation are not African American. What it does show is the very high rate of African American involvement in homicides and robberies. You take a look at the total of African Americans within the United States, 13%. 13% are committing the majority of robberies and committing the majority of homicides. As far as why our young men are being involved in these sort of crimes, any minister, any preacher in the city of Baltimore, D.C., doesn't matter, will tell you that it is a matter of that child's upbringing. I've sat and talked to hundreds of individual criminal offenders, both for my radio and television shows and individually, and they all talk about horrific backgrounds. You wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and try to find a bowl of cereal and get yourself off to school.
I get that. How many whites kill blacks yearly?
How many whites kill blacks on a yearly basis?
Yes.
The preponderance, when look, the
just answer the question. I got to move fast. How many? Just tell me.
I don't. There is no figure there. The figure is that when there is a disproportionate amount.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, since you don't want to answer. How many blacks kill each other annually?
How many blacks are killed annually?
Blacks kill each other. How many African Americans kill each other?
Oh, the overwhelming majority of what we call homicides now are African Americans killing other African Americans.
Okay, what is wrong with that picture, Dominique?
It's cultural. It's cultural, and we have to start looking at that. I don't care if what connection you have. There's white culture, black culture, Asian culture, Italian culture, and everything is connected by the race, right? Because that's going to be the common denominator, everything, and that's what everyone wants to use. They want to use race until we start looking at culture and how people are brought up in their tight-knit communities. You're not going to solve any of this problem.
And your final thoughts on how we can advance law enforcement in communities without over-policing? Is that possible? You have 20 seconds.
Yeah, do your job according to the Constitution.
Go ahead, Dominique.
Do your job according to the Constitution. Remind yourself why you got involved in this in the first place. You swore an oath to uphold, and that's your identity until you choose not to do the job anymore. Serving the people.
Leonard, you have 10 seconds.
The whole idea is to get the community and law enforcement to cooperate with each other, to embrace each other, because it's not going to work any other way.
And my final thoughts is we need to focus on who's committing this crime and put a stop to it and stop getting obsessed with race and getting obsessed with behavior. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we're out of here.